Is Jesus mentioned in the Talmud? In an attempt to stir up animosity between Christians and Jews, the Islamist hate-monger Daniel Hakikachu is claiming the Talmud insults Jesus. To prove this, he's regurgitating long debunked medieval libels that manipulate the text of the Talmud. He made the following disgusting claims and challenged me to refute them. So I will.
First, I have claimed that Judaism and Jewish religious texts are filled with hate and insults directed toward Jesus and his mother Mary.
Wow, where do I begin? I guess I should probably start with the name Jesus. Obviously, this doesn't appear in the Talmud, as it's an English word, so we're looking for the Hebrew equivalent, which is actually Yeshua. Now, this name is never mentioned in any of the medieval libels. Instead, they most frequently refer to Yeshu, not Yeshua. I'll explain who Yeshu is in a minute, but this is really important context as we look at Daniel's first quote, a translation from Gittin.
Onkelos then went and raised Jesus the Nazarene from the grave through necromancy.
And that's exactly the risk of relying on a translation. What Daniel doesn't realize is that the Hebrew doesn't say Jesus the Nazarene. It actually says Yeshu HaNotzri. And what he also doesn't know is that there are many different variations of the Talmud. The one he's quoting from is the Steinsaltz edition. But there are many other variations, and the overwhelming majority of them simply say Yeshu without appending HaNotzri. The oldest complete manuscript of the Talmud is the Munich edition from the year 1342. And in this edition, it simply says Yeshu. Here are two other manuscripts from the same period. One says HaNotzri and the other doesn't. As most of the older manuscripts leave out HaNotzri, the 13th century rabbi, the Me'eri, concluded that HaNotzri was added by copyists and was not in the original text. So now we're just left with someone the Talmud simply calls Yeshu. This is not Jesus, which is the case for every single one of Daniel's claims. So let's go through each of them.
1. The Talmud asserts that the Jews killed Jesus after a court session.
Daniel will now try and prove this by quoting from Sanhedrin.
On Passover Eve, they hung the corpse of Jesus the Nazarene after they killed him by way of stoning. And a crier went out before him for 40 days, publicly proclaiming, Jesus the Nazarene is going out to be stoned because he practiced sorcery, incited people to idol worship, and led the Jewish people astray.
So this Yeshu lived in the period of the Hashmonaim, as they're the court that put him to death. Now, the Hashmonaim only had this authority to execute Jews until the year 63 before the Common Era. After that, only the Roman court had this authority, which actually conforms to the account in the New Testament. An execution by the Hashmonaim places this Yeshu a century before Jesus. It also adds details that contradict the New Testament, like being stoned and then hung from a tree. There are other Yeshus in the Talmud, like Yeshu ben Pandera, whose stepfather spoke with Rabbi Akiva before his execution in the year 134, the Common Era. This places him a century after Jesus. Now we're done with his first claim, let's move on to the next.
2. The Talmud asserts that this was a good Torah-compliant deed because Jesus was guilty of calling people to idolatry and practicing sorcery.
As we've already established, the Yeshu that was killed by the Hashmonaim court for practicing idolatry and sorcery lived a century before Jesus. So let's go to his next claim.
3. The Talmud asserts that Jesus has been punished with hell, where he is being tortured in a vat of feces.
So as we just read, Daniel's proof of this was a quote from Gittin 57a. Now, I actually left out an important detail when we first read this, and that is that this parable is actually recording a Roman convert called Onkelos' conversion to Judaism. In it, he summons 3 non-Jews from the dead to ask them about the afterlife. One of them is his uncle Titus, the other is the prophet Balaam, and then the third non-Jew is someone called Yeshu. Now, obviously Jesus was Jewish, so it can't be him. That leaves just one outstanding charge to refute.
4. The Talmud asserts that Jesus' mother Mary is a harlot guilty of fornication, and indicates that Jesus' putative virgin birth was actually a result of such fornication.
Now, Daniel conveniently didn't bring any source for this, That's because if he had, it would have contradicted what he just said about Gittin. I'll show you what I mean. For years, bigots have tried to claim that the following quote is proof that the Talmud insults the mother of Jesus.
And Balaam, son of Beor the diviner. A diviner? He is a prophet. Rabbi Yochanan says, initially he was a prophet, but ultimately he lost his ability and remained merely a diviner. Rav Papa says that this is in accordance with the adage that people say, this woman was descended from princes and rulers, but was promiscuous with carpenters.
Are you seriously trying to infer that where it explicitly says Balaam, you actually think that's code for Jesus? And this actually is what bigots do. They've been doing it for years. But if you are arguing this, you can't then go and claim that Gittin 57a is also talking about Jesus, as in that verse, both Yeshu and Balaam appear in the same text. Despite what you may have read on the darkest, furthest fringes of the internet, Jesus doesn't appear in the Talmud. The two Yeshus people most frequently try to connect to Jesus lived a century before and a century after him. This is just another attempt from a Rasha Gadol to poison the close friendship between Christians and Jews.